Hello everyone. So, as some of you may know, if you watched my last update, which was in December, I've got into Strength and Honour, and wanted to talk a little bit about how I'm progressing with that, and also do a little bit of a video on the subject of some of the choices I've made and some of the problems that I've come across and how I've resolved them. So hopefully it'll be of interest to people who haven't considered playing Strength of Honour, but also to people who are playing it and who may have encountered some of the same issues that I have. So what I'm going to do first of all is just take you around what I've got painted, and then bring you back to this particular unit and start to talk about some of the aspects in more detail. So what you're looking at the moment is a Roman legion of 10 cohorts. These are 2mm figures. Now, until about a month and a half ago, I would never have considered playing Wargaming in 2mm. I just dismissed it out of hand. That's all changed since I was introduced to the game at my local club, and love the game so much that I can see how well suited the rules are to 2mm. You can just about play the game in 6mm, but anything larger than that, and it gets a little bit unrealistic, shall we say. The game is really about moving massive units around on the table. So the smallest unit is something like this, a Roman legion. It makes the game totally different from any other ancient set of rules that I've ever played, and I love it. And on top of that, the practicalities of transporting armies and so on are it's so much easier, and that is an issue for me as I don't drive, and I've just started going back to my local War Games club, and they're quite a distance from me now. They've moved from their previous location, and I need to take armies that are portable and playable with, and so on. So it's all turned out ideal for me. The other thing that some people might dismiss the rules out of hand for, which isn't an issue with me, but I know it certainly is with a lot of wargamers, is that it's a grid-based system. Now, I can understand some people's reservations with a grid-based system, and all I can say is that the Strength and Honour gets around those issues. So what I'm saying is, don't dismiss this game because it's 2mm, and don't dismiss it because it's grid-based, because it deals with the grid in a very different way to other grid-based sets of rules, and I think it makes it far more, it's a difficult word to use, realistic with war games, but it does overcome those difficulties of moving diagonally and so on, and you just really got to play the game. Hopefully I'll be able to put a backlight up in the fairly near future and show you how the rules work. So yeah, what you're looking at the moment is a Roman legion. This is the basic kind of unit of a Roman army. I'll just start to pan the camera around now a little bit, and as I say, I'm going to bring you back to that legion in a moment. So there you've got a camp, a fortified camp. This is a model that I printed 3D print. I think I either got the model, the STL file, on Etsy or from Wargames Vaults. There are quite a lot of 2mm scenery items available on the internet if you search for them, mainly Wargames Vault and Etsy. And you don't have to. I have tried. I've got some Roman buildings which the STL files are designed for 20mm, and I've tried reducing them by a tenth, and it doesn't work. You have to have something where the STL files are designed for sort of 6mm or 2mm in order for the print to come out realistically, I found. So that's the camp. Down here, this is as close as I can get the focus, I'm afraid, so you won't be able to see it in great detail. But these two figures here I'm going to use as my generals. So you only need one general in, yeah, it's not going to focus any closer than that, I'm afraid. You only need one general per army in the main, but I've got two Roman generals in case I ever play a game with two Roman armies combating one another. Here we've got a second legion. Behind that, I've been dabbling a little bit with experimenting with making some of my own scenery. Basically using video guides on Too Fat Lardy's YouTube channel. They've got a lot of videos on the subject of strength and honour and how to make various bits of terrain and so on. So this is a kind of marshy area or lake, and beside it there I've got my first of my woods. So this is made using a bobbly bath mat, and again there's a video on Too Fat Lardy's YouTube channel on how to go about making your own woods and forests. In the rules, I forget the exact number, but a wood is smaller than a forest, and forest is defined by the number of squares on the map that it occupies. In front of the wood, I've got some smaller units here. Now these are specialist kind of add-ons that you can add to your legions. So at the back I've got two double strength Praetorian cohorts, so you're allowed to add one, you have to pay points for them, but you're allowed to add a double strength Praetorian cohort to each legion if you want to, and it gives it some bonuses in the game. And in front of the Praetorian cohorts I've got two Devoteos, which are kind of almost like a fanatical cohort that are sent in advance of an attack, and you're only allowed to use one of those per army. But again, as with the generals, I've got two units in case I ever play two Roman armies together. So that's all the Roman figures I've got done so far. Not very much. I've been having to experiment a lot, and make a lot. As I say, I'm going to come back to that, the decisions I've made and the way I've been going about this. But I should be able to crack things out a little bit faster now. Unfortunately, I had a bit of a medical episode at the beginning of this week, which is going to slow me down a little bit, I'm afraid, for a while. So my painting may be slowed for a month or so, but hopefully I'll get back in the saddle fairly quickly. So next up then, you're now looking at some units of ancient Britons. You may spot that they're on a slightly smaller base than the Roman legions. That's because the Roman legions you can form up as a sort of triple ACs or double or single, but if they're in triple ACs they have to be on a slightly deeper base. So this is a unit of light chariots. Now, the light chariots have a skirmisher definition, which means that you can choose after deployment to remove the unit from the table and replace them with 3 lines of chariot skirmishers, which you attach to adjacent units in your battle formation. And that's why, so effectively that is all the same unit. It will just be played in the game in a different fashion. Behind the chariots, I've got another 3D printed item, which is a Celtic village. Beside that, I've got a resin bit of scenery that I purchased from a bring and buy about 1.5 years ago, so I've no idea who produces it, but thought it was ideal to get it out and paint it now, because it's probably still slightly too small even for 2mm scale, but it's a nice little sort of bit of scenery that was contemporary to the period we're talking about. The rules cover from from 100 BC to 200 AD at the moment, but there are supplements coming out. I understand the next supplement is going to cover the Punic Wars. In front of the hill, in front of the White Horse, is a warband, a Celtic warband, and then in front of those are 3 Celtic leaders. I only need one. In general, as I say, unless it's a massive game, you only need 1 leader per army. But I've just been playing around. And the one in the middle, again, apologies, I doubt very much whether you'll be able to get a good view of this, is a light chariot, but I used a bit of milliput attached to the head of the figure to represent kind of flowing hair, which I painted a sort of reddish ginger colour. So that is actually going to represent Boadicea in my games. Right, let's take you back to where we began with that first Roman legion. I'm going to start to talk now about choices that you're going to have to make when you start to paint figures and so on, and base them, and just give you an idea of how I've gone about it, and hopefully it will be of help to you. So as you probably guessed from the scenery, these figures are 3D printed. Now, there are plenty of metal figures available on the market. There's a company called Corhill. Actually, Corhill may be resin. They may be resin. I think they are resin. But they actually come printed as units with a space designed at the back to put a label, so that you can label the unit, so that the players know what that unit is on the table. That's definitely necessary with Corhill, because the Corhill sculpts, if you like to call them sculpts or moulds, are very generic. There's not much to distinguish one unit type from another, so you definitely need to have them labelled. Irregular miniatures have long done a range of 2mm, and I haven't got any. I've seen some, and there are plenty of pictures on Irregular's website. And I have to say, I think probably Irregular don't necessarily produce the best sculpts on the market, but in terms of 2mm, I think their figures are very good, and there's quite a lot of detail on them, and they seem to paint up quite well. So if I were to go down the metal route, I might even have gone via Irregular. But what I chose to do instead was to buy some figures from war bases. They do a range of figures called Antonine miniatures, and they sell them in conjunction with their MDF bases, so that you can buy a unit with the appropriate sized base. When I say appropriate sized base, there is no specific basing requirement. I'll come on to that again in a moment. But so I did buy some figures, and here is an example of a Roman cohort. Now you'll see immediately that it's got a much bigger footprint than my 3D printed cohorts. I don't see that as a big problem really. I've seen these figures painted up, and they do look great. The person that introduced me to Strength and Honor actually has a lot of these figures, but I'm not sure you'll be able. You probably can see on the camera. That's one side. That's another side. That's the third side, and that's the fourth side. And there is no back or front. You know, they're basically representation of a rectangular shield all the way around, and you know, sort of little pimples to represent the heads or the helmets, and that's it. That's as far as it goes, and perfectly acceptable. They do look good en masse, but while I was waiting for these to arrive, I was purchasing quite a lot of figures from a company called Project Wargaming. Project Wargaming have a YouTube channel of that name as well. He's a wargamer. He tends to specialise in 2mm and 6mm, and he's designed his own STL files, and a lot of them are available on his website. And you know, these are some of them, and they have masses more detail on them. Again, because of the difficulty of focusing on such small items, I don't think you'll be able to see a great deal, but hopefully you can see there glinting a little bit. They have shields at the front. They even have bosses on the shields. They have emblems and eagles and standards and so on that you can see standing proud of the surface of the print. On the sides, hopefully you can see there maybe, they don't have the shields all the way around. They have arms with, in this case they have the gladius, you can see them, tiny little gladii there. You can see their legs. The back is different again. And around on the figure's left, there is a kind of representation of the shield, you know, from that side. So they vary a lot. There's even, and I doubt very much whether you'll be able to see it. Maybe you can see it just there in the front rank. Didn't print out well on all of these prints, but there's even a centurion with you know, the sort of feathered helmet, the crested helmet, which I've painted white in that case. I thought if I painted it red, it would just look like I'd miss, you know, the brush would miss the shields or something like that. So there is, for 2mm, there is a massive amount of detail that you don't have to be necessarily too careful about painting. Just dry brushing will pick that detail out. But it does, it just goes that extra step. So that is the way, you know, I'm going to go forward now. There are going to be some cases where I'm going to have to buy metal because there aren't the units or the type available on the STL file. Forgive me for a moment, I forgot to get it out ready. I'll show you an example of that. Yeah, here we go. So this is from Antonine Miniatures, War Bases. This will be a wagon lager, which I couldn't find a file for on Project Wargaming. So that's going to be a wagon lager. I might change out the figures for some printed ones, but other than that, that's going to be like a camp, basically, for the ancient Britons. Now, in terms of basing, as I said earlier, there's no hard and fast, prescription on how you base them. War bases have 120 mil. Their bases are 120 mil frontage and either 60 or 80 deep. So the legions are on 80 deep. But standard units, most units are 60 by 80. Two Fat Lardies or Dry-Switch Press on the Two Fat Lardies website, you can purchase pre-printed units. So let's get the Roman Legion one out. As we're looking at Roman Legion, so this is a pre-printed card of a Roman Legion. It's kind of more or less the same size as that, 180 by 60. It's slightly smaller, which might be to do with the way I printed it. I might have printed it to fit on the paper rather than its actual size. So you could play the game. It costs £5. You get, I don't know, it's about 20 or 30 different unit types. So you've got plenty to play a game there if you wanted to try the rules out without buying and painting any figures. I decided it was worth investing in these because the friend who introduced me to the game has got these prints as well, and what he's done is cut out this sort of line here, laminated it, and he's got that attached to the back of his bases so that he can write on it what the unit is and its various factors in the game. I've decided not to go down that route and not to label my units at all, partly because of the benefit of that that added advantage of having so much more detail on the 3D prints to the metal ones, that it's possible to tell more easily what the unit represents. So I'm gonna, when I play my games, I'm gonna have a piece of paper, a typed piece of paper with the unit characteristics on them for each player to know, rather than it detracting from the visual sight of these units on the tabletop. So that's the way I'm going to go, just to show you some of the. So that's the equivalent of where are we, of that unit there, and then there's a warband there. Warbands are a little bit more kind of variable in that you can configure them. You can have open warbands and masked warbands and so on. So how you represent them on your bases is more or less up to you. Right, now to the kind of horny problem, or hoary problem, is it? I don't know, I can't remember, of grid sizes. Okay, now on the Two Fat Lardies website, there's a forum, and part of it covers Rice Press publications, and so there are questions on there about strength and honour. And Mark Backhouse, the author of the rules, has been asked what sort of about basing requirements and grid sizes and so on, and his response is really, don't get hung up on the dimensions. which is fair enough, but it doesn't solve the problem that you are going to have to choose some kind of basing sizes and grid sizes. So this is this is the decisions that I've made. This map that you're looking at these figures on is from Tiny Wargames, and it's a gridded map. Let's just zoom out a bit so you can see one of the grids at least. It's a gridded map. It was intended for use with Western, so the Peter Pig rules, a lot of the Peter Pig rules are gridded. And it's a 5'3" mat, and the grid dimensions are 6 inches. So I can use this for Strength and Honour. It's not ideal, partly because the recommended table size for Strength and Honour is actually 6 foot by 4, so it's a little bit too small, but it'll do me to begin with while I'm only playing smaller games, and just to get the hang of the rules. There are a number of problems. They're not problems, but there are a number of contradictory kind of factors here. 6-inch squares is about the sort of size that the rules kind of imply you need, except they're not. A square of that size in the game is actually not 1 square but 4. So the unit facing is supposed to occupy 2 squares, and the depth is supposed to occupy roughly 1 square. So you can see how with this Roman legion, here we go, I've got a second Roman legion here, I can put 2 Roman legions within that 6-inch boundary, and that's right because each legion is supposed to occupy an area that is 2 squares by 1. So that works in the game, it's fine, and this is why Mark Backhouse says don't get hung up on the rules. The problem is, though, that they're talking about 75 centimetre squares, not 3-inch squares. I mean, there's not much difference between 6 inches and 150 centimetres, but there is a difference, and that difference is more remarkable, is more obvious when you come to printing these squares out onto a mat, because most mat manufacturers produce mats in feet and inches, not in meters and centimeters. So if you were to ask for a mat, and you can do this, you can ask mats to design you with any sort of grid specification you want. If you were to ask for them to print you a 6 foot by 4 mat with 150 centimetre squares, then you've got wasted area around the edges, where there's a sort of incomplete squares all the way around the boundaries. You're much better off going with squares that ask for 6-inch squares, I think, and so that the squares go right up to the edge. It seems to make sense to me. It's this constant, ongoing problem about the sort of trying to accommodate both metric and imperial measurements into everything we do. But there we are. And the other thing is that war bases, as I said earlier, sell their Antonine figures along with bases, but their bases aren't 150 or 15 rather centimetres wide. They're 12 centimetres wide. So they're not going by the 75 millimetre square system. They're using a different one again. So you do get that whatever decision you make, you are going to be kind of ultimately driven by the need to, to one extent or another, to standardize your bases. It's not going to, if the bases are different from your opponent, it's not going to make a massive difference. But I think most people do want some kind of prescription and some kind of standardization. And I don't understand why so many people, so many rule writers and, so on, do say, do have this attitude, don't get hung up. Why not just say it? It's their rules. They can specify the base sizes they want. So what I've decided to go for, and I'm sure most of you are going to do the same thing, unless you've got very kind of specific requirements, are going to go with 6-inch squares on a mat and 120 by 80 in this case, or 60 in the case of standard unit millimeters bases. So that's what I'm going to do, and I'm sure a lot of you will make the same choice. In terms of actual mat manufacturers, as I say, this is a Tiny Wargames mat. Now, there are 3 main companies that I can see that you could get mats from, that you could play this game with. Tiny Wargames is one of them. I have decided I'm not going to buy a 6'4" mat for Strength and Honour from Tiny Wargames. It's not that they're bad mats or anything, it's just that I find it slightly frustrating that every time I go to Tiny Wargames website to buy a mat, their website seems to have changed, and it's changed since I last went on it, and it is possible to ask for mats with grids on them, but they don't seem to produce these mats any longer for specifically for Peter Pig games that are 5 foot by 3. And if you want grids or hexes or anything on your mats, you actually have to give them a note of what you want and so on. And I have had problems in the past with Tiny Wargames where they've misunderstood or my instructions, and sent me the wrong requirements and so on. So I'm not very, it's partly the fact that their ordering system seems to have changed once again, and they're not bad experiences, but I've had less than satisfactory experience of buying from Tiny Wargames in the past. So I've decided that I'm going to go for a mat from Deep Cut Studios, and it's much easier to ask for very specific requirements on the Deep Cut Studios website. You actually just go into their printer mat section, you download the mat that you want, or you send them a picture of a design for the mat that you want, which is interesting in a way that you could maybe send them a satellite image of a battlefield or something like that. But anyway, I didn't go into that. I selected a mat from their bog standard mats, and then you go into their printer mat section and you can ask them to print whatever coloured lines you want. You can ask them just to print the crosses in the corner. You can specify the exact dimensions of the squares and so on. So that's what I've decided to do. However, in the case of both Tiny Wargames and Deep Cut Studio, all of their mats are really aimed at the more conventional scales. So you can see there's a kind of design on this mat. There's a bit of sort of pebbly rock kind of appearance to it. Neither Deep Cut Studio nor Tiny Wargames do mats that are specifically look as though the terrain is meant to represent a scale of 2 millimeters. It's not a huge problem because that could represent a boulder or it could represent a pebble. so it's not a massive problem. But Geek Villains do a mat that is specifically designed to play with Strength and Honor. Only problems with that I have, one is that they only do one mat at the moment, and it's Sicily. So it'd be a great mat if you wanted to play the first or second Servile Wars, for instance, which happened in Sicily. Not so suitable for playing battles that took place in ancient Britain. So I decided not to buy that mat, not for the time being anyway. I might get it in the future. But the other thing that puts me off Geek Villains, which is my own personal taste, is that their mats are always stamped in the corner with their logo, and I just don't see I don't see the need to do that, and I try to avoid buying mats that have that prominent a trademark on them. I bought their mat. I'm not going to advertise their mat for them as well, and especially in the case of a 2mm game, that logo is extremely large in terms of 2mm scale. So so the three companies you could go for: Tiny Wargames, Deep Cut Studios, and Geek Villain. He pays your money and you makes your choice. Right, so that's everything I wanted to say on the subject of the decisions I've made about mats and grid sizes and base sizes and so on. So now I'm going to go on, I think, to talking a little bit about issues I had with 3D printing. So if you haven't got a 3D printer, or you're thinking of buying the metal ones, hang around, because after that I'm going to discuss, have a conversation about downloads and add-ons and all that kind of thing, which will be relevant whichever way you go figure-wise. Okay, so here we are back with one of those Praetorian cohorts, the double strength cohorts that I've printed out to my satisfaction, but I did have to go through an awful lot of trial and error before I got to this stage. So the first thing I would say is that if you've got a 3D printer, I would really recommend that you purchase STL files and print your own figures out for this game rather than buy the metal figures. But be warned that it's not straightforward. You will have to experiment and so on. First thing I discovered was that it really pays to go for a very high end resin. I don't think plastic printers, the PLA printers, would work at all. Has to be a resin printer, and I purchased this Soraya Tech Tenacious resin. I did start off using my standard resin and didn't get very good results, so that was a good decision. And you can water that down, or mix it rather, with cheaper resins, but you get so much out of a bottle that yes, it's expensive. It cost me £68 for a litre, but you're going to get an awful lot of figures in 2mm out of that one bottle. So I didn't think it was worth degrading it with cheaper resins and saving a bit of money. Just went for it. Now the next thing that I discovered is that Project Wargaming recommend painting the figures while they're still on their support. So here is an example of a Praetorian cohort that you can see is still on the support. So it's raised above this raft, and it's the raft that is attached to the build plate, so it's suspended upside down. And goes in and out of the resin tank like that and slowly gets printed. So you will need to give supports to a lot of the STL files. If you didn't give them supports at all and you try to break those individual, break the print off of the build plate, you're going to damage it anyway. So that seemed to work. That seemed to be going fine. But I soon came across a problem, and that is that the minute you begin to detach the print from the supports after you painted it, the whole thing just disintegrates and crumbles. So this is the outcome of me very carefully trying to detach that from the supports, and this looks like I've just ripped it off, but I really did try my best to take that off as carefully as I could. So, very frustrating. I should say as well that in some cases the files from Project Wargaming come both supported and unsupported, and in others you will have to add supports yourself. Can't remember how this one came, but you'll get the same issue. If you use the supports, the files with supports that come from Project Wargaming, you're going to get that same issue of it's virtually impossible to break them off their supports. You can see here, I just moving it around, I've just broken another little piece off there. So that that's handling it quite carefully. So I don't think that's necessarily going to be the case with all of Project Wargaming's files, but it's certainly the case with the Legions, and I'll just demonstrate why that's happening. So this has been my solution anyway. It's how to get around it is that I have now started printing the files with the smallest length of support that I can possibly get away with, and leaving them attached to the supports, and then gluing them down onto a base and building up a little bit of textured basing material, or I use dilute polyfiller and so on, just building it up so that that little minimal support that there is can't be seen, and what can be seen you can incorporate into the figure, just by painting it a sort of flesh colour or something like that. It looks a bit like it's their shins or their kneecaps and so on. So I'm happy with that. I think that works quite well. There we go. That's what it looks like on the base. But to just show you why that problem is happening, this is printed with that tenacious Suraya Tech tenacious resin, which is very flexible. So this is almost like rubber, and you can see that I can bend the figure that way, and every single file of that unit, of that cohort, comes apart from the adjacent file. And if I do it in the other direction, you can see that every single rank of the unit comes apart from the rank in front or behind. So it's inevitable. That isn't a single print, it's lots of little individual aggregates making up the print, so it's bound to fall apart. So that is the way I've got around that problem, and that is something that I'm sure you will encounter if you purchase these figures. But it's not insurmountable, and the finished effect, I think, is it's worth taking the time and trouble to do this, because the finished result is so much better than the metal version. But if you don't have a 3D printer and you intend to buy STL files and then send them to someone to print for you, unless it's someone who's prepared to experiment a lot and get a lot of failures, then I would say don't attempt it. Go for the metal versions. Don't go for this this type of print, because you'll only get frustrated. And a lot of professional printers who print STL files on demand won't attempt to separate the figures from the bases. They'll just send you them back on their supports and leave it up to you to make a mess of it like that. So it's not worth your time. It's not worth your money to pay for that, get that back, and then find they're all ruined when you come to try and detach them from the supports. Yeah, I think that is everything I wanted to talk to you about 3D printing. As I say, some of them, some files you'll have. Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, the light chariots, for instance, I printed on supports that are that long because they don't have that issue of being divided in by ranks and files. And then the tenacious resin, I could literally snip through the supports closer to the raft, and then literally hold on to the print and tug with a pair of tweezers at each support, and it will stretch, but then it will divide at the weakest point, which is the join. So I can end up with a fairly intact print, even treating it fairly roughly. Occasionally the shaft between the horses and the chariot would come apart, but that's not a problem, just to glue them together on the base so you don't notice that they're two separate items. So it's not as easy as you might think it would be, but it's worth all the effort at the end. But if you haven't got your own 3D printer or a friend who's prepared to collaborate with you in printing them, I would recommend going down the metal route. Okay, so next up then I want to talk a bit about downloads and add-ons and that kind of thing. Okay, now apart from dice and figures and a mat to play on and scenery and so on, there are a few additional requirements you need to play a game of Strength and Honour. This is the set of rules here, hardback version, not hardback, hard copy version. You can also get this in PDF. I have both, which is not necessary. It has been of use. I'll go into that a bit more in a moment or two. But certain things are required. One of them is that you have a command board, what they call a command board here, which you allot points to these various sections, and then you play those points during the game. So it is necessary. You do need to have one. Neither the hardback version or the PDF have that on any page, so that you could either cut it out or print it from PDF. So what do you do about that? Well, I was curious to know how my opponent, who introduced me to these rules, did have a printed out version of this Strength and Honour command board, and he also had a printed out quick reference sheet. And I was really puzzled about how he'd found it. Couldn't find it anywhere on the Tfat Lardy's website, and he eventually sent me a link to it. He found the page again and sent me a link to it, and it turned out. So this is a tip that I can give you if you're having a similar problem to me. It turns out you're going to have this problem if you, like me, you've come to the Strength and Honour party late, because Too Fat Lardies did produce a downloadable version of a quick reference sheet. Here it is, brief that I finally, double-sided, that I finally got it, and this command board. But they put it on their news page, which actually is only a single page. So when an item has become a little bit older, it falls off. So they did that in April 2022, and the oldest news on their news page is May 2022. So it's just recently become unavailable, which is why I had a problem. But you still can find it, and here's proof that you can, but you don't go to the Too Fat Lardies webpage to find it. Google Strength and Honour downloads, and then you will find it. Just click on the search results for that and you will find it. So that's something that might puzzle people. But in the meantime of being frustrated, not being able to find it, I did discover that war bases actually do an MDF version. They call it the Strength and Honour dashboard, but it is the Strength and Honour command board. I'll get it open to show you. Oh, it looks as though it's sealed, so I won't open it up at the moment. I'll open it up when I need it. But there's the an MDF version of the board behind. It also comes with some numeric tokens that you can put on the board to represent the army breakpoint and so on, or yeah, I think that's probably the best way of doing it. And then it comes with these tokens that you can place. So say you had 2 attack points, you could put 2 tokens on the attack square and so on. So I think that's quite a nice little supplement to the game. I want to get another one, but at the moment this one is the Augustus Denarii tokens. They do one for the Iceni Celts, but that's out of stock at the moment, so I'm going to hold on and get another one with the Iceni Celts, so that I've got two of them. Now, the reason that I found out about this board was that there is another very definite defect in these rules, which are that the game is played using makes use of cards. So you have disaster cards and setback cards. I won't go into how they're used in the game, save that for another day, but they are definitely necessary. Unlike the quick reference sheet and the command board, these cards aren't available to download, even though it does say in the rules may not be able to find it. Yeah, I won't take too long to search for it, but it specifically says in the rules that the cards are available to download, and they're not. You have to work your way around that and come up with an alternative system. The two systems would your first thought would be that you cut them out of the back of the book and just laminate them maybe, and the other would be that you print them from your PDF version. Neither of those solutions work, and I'll tell you why later. So what my friend has done is to get some tokens printed up with that he's painted the backs of the tokens either black or red, and he's got numeric values on them that correspond with the numeric values that they should have here. That works fine. Not ideal to my mind, in that having you're meant to keep the values on the back hidden from both yourself and your opponent. Neither player should know the value on the back of the card stroke token. So what you have to do is to put them all down flat, spread out on a part of the table somewhere, and they do occupy quite a large area. There's 64 of them in all. It's 48 and 16. Yeah, that's 64 altogether. They do occupy quite a large area, so it's not ideal, but it is a solution, and that's the way he's gone. I thought I would try and go one step further than that. So I actually approached Colin Farrant at Charlie Foxtrot Models, who in the past has sort of custom made tokens for me and so on, and asked him whether he'd be able to do it, and whether if he did so, he'd be infringing any kind of copyright rules. And I also asked him at the time, because I wasn't aware of it, if he could do a command board for me. And he said he would contact Mark Backhouse and check what was going on and whether he could do that. And he came back and said Mark Backhouse advised him that the Strength and Honour command board was already available through Warbases, so he didn't need. He was advised not to do that for me, and that the Two Fat Lardies were in discussion with Warbases about producing tokens. So I didn't have any joy there, and in the meantime, the options are either to get the cards printed out or to wait on Warbases producing these tokens. So the reason why I said that it was a very unsatisfactory solution, to either cut these out or to get them printed is, I think the reason why it's unsatisfactory to cut them out of the book is fairly clear. You're permanently damaging the book. So what I did was I purchased the PDF version, and I took it into a professional printer's. The reason I took it into a professional printer's rather than printing it off myself is that my printer can print double-sided, and you need to have those corresponding figures on the back of the corresponding card face there. I can print double-sided, but I have to do it manually. I have to turn the sheets over and put them back in the printer, and you have to have these lined up fairly carefully. So I thought I would take them into a professional printer and get them printed. I got 2 lots printed, so this is showing you them in the raw, as it were. This is what my professional printer came up with, and these are the cards. This is the final version of the cards, which look at first glance they're not bad. They look pretty good. So I've got the 16 disaster cards and the 48 setback cards there, and this is what I'm going to be using, so I'm not griping too much, but all I would say is that how many wargaming rules do you know that require cards where the cards aren't commercially available? I can't think of any. I've got so many wargames rules, too many to mention, that use cards. And you can always, if you want to save money, you can always print your own. But if you don't, if you're not if you want to go the full hog, you can buy the cards in nice little packs. You know, there's so many muskets and tomahawks, sharp practice, jugular, soldiers of Napoleon, soldiers of Rome, soldiers of God. It just goes on and on. I just couldn't understand why there wasn't a commercially available pack of cards for this set of rules. And I think it's my biggest criticism of the rules, you know, that I can think of. However, having started this process of getting it preprinted by a professional, I am now beginning to understand why there may not be a commercial set of rules, and that is because these pages are very, very badly designed. So, first thing that the printer, because I was there in the shop while he was printing them up, and we were talking about this, the first thing problem that he noticed was this area with the numeric values on differs from this area here. With his software, he was able to line the two sides up quite closely, but even doing so, they don't match, and that's because the dimensions, particularly of the disaster cards. So let's try and get if I try and show you here, you can tell it by shining it through putting it up against a bright light and looking through it. You can see it immediately. But that area, that length of that area, is about just over 23 centimeters, and this area here is 23.5 centimeters. So there's nearly half a centimeter discrepancy between the size on one side of the page and the other. So that's if they sent this page to a professional card printer to print up on cardstock a set of cards, they would have had a problem immediately. They would have had the reply back that it was technically impossible to do. So I think that is why there isn't a commercially available set of rules. It gets worse than that though. So basically, my disaster cards, he lined them up as best he could. It makes no difference to the playing of the game, in that some of these cards have a white kind of edge to them. You don't notice it that badly. It's just an aesthetic thing in the case of the disaster cards. However, the next thing is that you will notice that if you are going to cut these pages out, and this is the same, if you cut this out the book, you'd have the same problem, is that the black border is the same width around the outside of the print as it is on the internal. So that means that if you were to cut it out conforming to the black line, you would have to cut halfway through the interior lines, making the black borders around some of the edges a different size to the cards that were in the interior, meaning that the cards would be of a different size. So again, you might not think that's a problem. So what I did was I cut off a little bit. I did it all by eye, but I cut off a little bit of the edge all the way around, so that all my cards have a similar size black border, which is not as noticeable as the black border around there. But again, if they sent that to a card manufacturer to print commercially available cards, that would immediately have been an issue with the card manufacturer. So not a very good plan again. Not very well designed, and yeah, I'll tell you what else has been a problem before. I point out the other thing that is an issue with that. So here we've got all the setback cards. Now at the top of here you've got two cards. The borders match. The cards are noticeably of a different size. Now that is a massive problem. The reason for that is that the borders are all the same around these cards. Let's find the one that's got the 3. It's this one. But if you look at the actual size of the picture, so the picture itself, ignoring the border of this one here, is just under 6 centimetres. That one there is 5.5 centimetres. So the cards are a different size. Now that is a problem because, as I said earlier, neither player must know the values on the back of these cards, and you've only got to play this game once or twice to know that the card that is value 3 is smaller than the other cards on that page. So that is insurmountable. There's no getting around that. You've just got to accept that both players will know when they or their opponent has a value of 3. It's crucial to the game because part of the game is trying to estimate when the opponent has reached their break point, or when you're fast approaching your break point, and the break point is the cumulative value of all these numbers on the back of the cards. So what I was going to say about these borders is that had you not cut round the edges of these borders, you would have known that cards with thicker borders around 1 or 2 of the edges were certain values. So you would begin, as you played the game, you would begin to be able to identify the numerical values behind the cards from the back of the cards. So definitely negative points for Ricevich Press or Too Fat Lardies or whoever's responsible for that. It's something that they need to rectify, and they need to rectify swiftly, rather than going to war bases to try and see if they can produce some tokens. They should try and do something about getting some proper cards out there. I think that would be my biggest criticism of this game. It's a massive kind of publishing error. Anyway, that's not to detract from the game itself, which is fabulous, and hopefully in the not too distant future I'll be able to put a back rep up of the game and show you how it plays, and about all the sophisticated mechanisms of the game. I think it's a really unique set of rules. It's really reignited my interest in the Ancients period, and I'm gonna have a lot of fun with it. So that's coming up in the future. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you've got something out of this, given you some tips if you're going about playing the game, or sparked your interest in acquiring it if you haven't got it already. Thanks for watching, and see you on the next video. Bye for now.